He pleaded guilty to nearly 24 federal fraud charges. Now some patients in Northwest Indiana say their former doctor is getting a slap on the wrist for what he did. That's all tonight on Fox Chicago News. Still to come, outrage over a doctor's agreement with prosecutors.
4 years in jail seems like kind of a joke for as many people as he hurt.
Coming up, our legal analyst Larry Yellen talks with victims of the so-called runaway doctor about his sentence. In Northwest Indiana, he's called the runaway doctor. Dr. Mark Weinberger fled his practice and left behind a slew of dissatisfied and debilitated patients. Authorities eventually caught him, and Weinberger pleaded guilty to nearly 24 federal fraud charges. While the doctor will be sentenced next week, some of his former patients and their families think he's getting a sweetheart deal in return for his plea. Our legal analyst Larry Yellen explains.
Even if you're not a patient of his, you probably know who this man is. Mark Weinberger is the infamous Northwest Indiana sinus doctor who disappeared mysteriously in 2004. At the time, he and his then-wife Michelle lived a lavish lifestyle filled with private jets and jewelry. The two were vacationing on a Greek island when she woke up one morning to find him missing. Italian police found him 5 years later, hiding in a tent in the mountains.
I just wanted them to find him because I knew, that he had done terrible things to a lot of people.
Gladys Donahue is one of about a dozen former patients of Dr. Mark Weinberger who wrote letters to the federal judge hearing Weinberger's fraud case. Much like the other patients, Gladys wrote the judge urging him to reject the deal Weinberger accepted from federal prosecutors last fall, saying the sentence offered doesn't match his crimes.
I think it's terrible. I think he should get much, much more.
The deal is this: 4 years in prison in exchange for Weinberger's pleading guilty to all 22 counts of health care fraud. In this lawsuit, prosecutors say he overbilled the patients and in some cases did not provide any services at all.
And the real victims are not the banks or the insurance company that was defrauded. The real victims are the people that were harmed.
Attorney Ken Allen is representing Gladys Donahue and dozens of Dr. Weinberger's other former patients in medical malpractice suits. More than 300 such cases have been filed against Weinberger in Indiana State Court. In many of them, Allen says Weinberger performed unnecessary surgeries that only made the patient's conditions worse.
After the surgery, I simply wasn't better, and I didn't get better.
He billed them all about $15,000 for the surgery and about $1,500 for these post-operative visits, and collected a very, very handsome fee, earning up to $1.8 million or $2 million a month.
Those millions of dollars were not enough to keep Dr. Weinberger from taking off when another patient, Phyllis Barnes, did not respond well to his treatments.
Well, he actually fled the country right after her obituary was in the newspaper.
Sean Barnes's mother, Phyllis, died in September of 2004. Last month, a civil jury in Lake County, Indiana, found Weinberger committed malpractice in the mother's death. He treated her for a deviated septum and nasal polyps, instead of diagnosing her with stage 4 throat cancer. Before she died, Phyllis Barnes had her voice box removed.
Hopefully this is going to help other people.
She just sort of suffered on a daily basis because, her life was so radically changed by having that hole in her throat to breathe.
The jury awarded Phyllis Barnes' estate $13 million. Despite that hefty amount, her daughter says Weinberger's federal plea deal is not enough.
4 years in jail seems like kind of a joke for as many people as he hurt.
While his disappearance was a surprise at the time, Weinberger's now ex-wife, Dr. Michelle Kramer, believes he was planning it for some time. She explained in this videotaped deposition in the Barnes' civil suit.
His behavior was bizarre. He had bought books on how to disappear. He bought foreign language tapes and survival gear.
We asked the U.S. Attorney's Office in Hammond about the patient's letters and the doctor's plea deal. A spokesman told us simply no comment. Weinberger is scheduled to be sentenced next week. It's important to note that malpractice is not a federal or state criminal offense. And despite the plea agreement, it's ultimately still up to the judge to decide just how much time he will spend in prison. Without the plea deal, he was facing up to 10 years on each count. Larry Yellen, Fox Chicago News.